Move this. Yeah, it does look kind of, it vibrates a little.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight at Center for Book Arts for the launch of Cyberfeminism Index. We have tonight Mindy Seu and Laura Kuhns. And before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that CDA is on ancestral unceded territory of the Lenape people. This event is being live streamed and you'll be able to watch it afterwards on our YouTube channel. Center for Book Arts is the oldest nonprofit dedicated to uplifting book artists through exhibitions, educational programs, studio access, and artist residency programs. Cyberfeminism Index is a project by Mindy Seu that was featured earlier this year in the exhibition Beyond Codex, Living Archives, curated by Anthony Tino and Shahar Kramer. Mindy Seu, well, I would like to introduce Mindy Seu and Laura Kuhns.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. So because we are at the Center for Book Arts, we're going to switch up our presentation today and focus on references and material objects for the book itself. As Camila mentioned, I'm Mindy Seu. I'm a designer. I teach at Rutgers and Yale. And I've also been working on this project as an umbrella for the past 3.5 years. And I'm excited that today we're joined by Laura Kuhns, who is also a designer at the New Museum, teaches at Princeton, and is also a designer of this book, which we'll be talking about in depth today. Or should I say anything else? We wanted to do informal intros to focus on the informal presentation we're about to have. All right, so behind me, you see the names of a lot of people. This is basically the title sequence for this book. It was really made through conversation. So you'll see a lot of people here, like Laura, the designer, the lithographers, the editors, the press, inventory press, as well as people at PioneerWorks, GSD, various funders, and a lot of the people who contributed entries to this book. This will continue to loop, and maybe we'll turn it on at the end, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to pause this. So this book here is the Cyberfeminism Index. This is a source book, an annotated chronology, and a collection of online activism and net art from the past 3 decades, 1991 to present. And it's structured as an index of indexes. And we'll be giving examples of how we might be able to use this book later today. But before we get to that, what is cyberfeminism? So the best way to define this is by not giving a clear definition. Historically, people have left it undefined so people could create definitions that felt more self-identifiable and more inclusive. If I were to describe this on my own, I would start by breaking apart the word itself. So this prefix cyber first emerged in Norbert Wiener's cybernetics. People familiar with this movement, field of study? So cybernetics, in the most simple one-liner, is this idea that not only do you impact a system, that system is impacting you. So you're in this constant feedback loop of behavioral change. Cyber was then fixed to space, cyberspace, in the 1980s in William Gibson's Neuromancer. Has anyone read this novel? Some nodding heads. So Neuromancer was important for many reasons. It kind of predicted the online sensory computing landscapes that we're very much talking about today. Think of the metaverse and virtual realities and etc. However, Gibson's cyberspace was very much shaped by the male gaze. So you have fembots and cyberbabes and depictions of women or feminine things, typically in like a cyborgian or assistant-like role. So when cyber was then fixed to feminism in 1991, This happened in two distinct moments, unbeknownst to the other, by the Australian art collective VNS Matrix and the British cultural theorist Sadie Plant. So by combining these two seemingly disparate parts, it was almost like an oxymoron or a provocation. How can women or marginalized communities kind of predict what this cyberspace or techno-utopia might be? And you'll also see a lot of examples of techno-dystopia throughout this book as well. This sticker, though, comes from the Old Boys Network. So the Old Boys Network is a 1990s German cyberfeminist collective. This is specifically from the research of Helene von Oldenburg's research on the public opinion surrounding cyberfeminism. In the 90s, as you can see through this pie chart, it was met with a lot of confusion. And ultimately, even if they're kind of considered one of the first cyberfeminist collectives, they also leave the term cyberfeminism undefined, again, with the attempts to be more inclusive and adaptable. This book is also the edited hard copy of its soft copy, the Cyberfeminismindex.com. So this site was also made in collaboration with Angeline Meitzer, Charles Bruskowski, and Janine Rosen, and it serves as the living archival complement to this book. So if you imagine this book kind of as a snapshot or a document of a moment, that website will continue to live for as long as possible, and you can still submit entries today. So when you first go to cyberfeminismindex.com, you're kind of met with this green blur that then snaps to a fairly standard table. But upon interacting with the site, it's made to feel unusual. So you have this breathing green blur. As you click entries, it's added to the side panel, which we call the trail. And you can also download all of these entries. So in theory, you could select every single entry on cyberfeminismindex.com and download it as a PDF. This book is also an interface. So it's filled with hyperlinks. Embedded in every entry, there are these green pills that will connect you to complementary entries or things that juxtapose its theme. And it's really meant to encourage nonlinear reading because the book is kind of structured like an encyclopedia. So rather than a series of essays, you have a series of entries organized chronologically in this main index. We might associate the hyperlink with a digital link, but it's actually important to note that there have been many analog precursors to this, including cross-references like we see here, bibliographies, footnotes, indexes. All of these are early examples of analog hyperlinks that are often cited by people who created the internet, like Ted Nelson or Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So in entry 146, in this early 1990s book about cyberfeminism, in the editor's note, they actually call their cross-references hypertextual links. And throughout the margins, you'll see an eye icon whenever you want to jump to different pages in the book. So to create as much of a hyperlinked analog experience as possible, you can continue to follow these pills, and an example of that hyperlink learning trail might look something like this. Cyberfeminism is a mutating word with a nebulous history. Its evolution is less a single root system with multiple branches than a network of entangled rhizomes, constantly and multidirectionally moving. Virginia Barrett of the Australian art collective VNS Matrix has described cyberfeminism as anti-genealogical, anti-authorial, and a hostile mucus, never faithful to any origins. Cross-reference 8. Cross-reference 8, VNS Matrix, 1991. The most consistent VNS Matrix genesis story is that VNS Matrix crawled out of the cyber swamp in the particularly hot summer of 1991, and via an aesthetics of slime initially generated as porn. VNS Matrix forged an unholy alliance with technology and its machines, spewing forth a blasphemous text which was the birth of cyberfeminism. VNS Matrix was on a mission to hijack the toys from techno-cowboys and remap cyberculture with a feminist bent. This is one story. There are also stories about a slime consciousness operating via spiral space. Cross-reference 181. (181) Tales from the Puppet Mistress, Gash Girl, 2000. Years after losing my machine virginity to a Mac 512K, I have slipped through the reality grid into the clear, violent haze of spiral space. Desire. I slide through the luminous screen to inhabit the spaces between words. The keyboard is constantly sticky. Madness. An erotically reconstructed a replicant, my biocode is being rewritten. This is better than any drug. Cross-reference 646. Discortizadora, Ripper. Mestiza of the southern pussy, meat of a pussy that expels word vomit, conserved by death and disgust of the colonization representing an ancestral systemic violation in live flesh. I do not feel pride because I was born full of prejudices. No Man's Land. Cross-reference 95. (95) Confessions of a Webback. You call yourself a webback. Do you see yourself as an intruder on the net? I consider myself a coyote, a smuggler of ideas. We want net inhabitants to get used to a new cultural sensibility, but we do encounter the linguistic border patrol. So if you were to move through this book, through the cross-references, you would actually end up getting through all 703, but I won't do that now. You can also move through it intuitively, or if you have a specific person or title in mind, you can go to our index of titles. As well as our index of people. And that's concluded with our index of images. All New Gen, VNS Matrix, 1992. Sabotage the databanks of Big Daddy mainframe. Your guides through the contested zone are renegade DNA sluts. The most wicked is Circuit Boy, a dangerous techno bimbo. Be prepared to question your gendered construction. Genital Panic, Merry Magic, 2020. We must reconsider the normative body and how disobedient bodies are already pathologized, from the medicalization of infants born of ambiguous genitalia to the disqualification of intersex athletes on the basis of biology. These guidelines matter. They determine how we are policed and how we are surveilled. The Black Trans Archive, Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley, 2020. Welcome to the Pro-Black, Pro-Trans Archive. This interactive archive was made to store and center Black trans people, to preserve our experiences, our thoughts, our feelings, our lives, to remember us even when we are at risk of being erased. So in order to enter this archive, which is still online today, you're prompted with 3 options. The first is if you're Black and trans. The second is if you're trans. And the third is if you're cis. And depending on your selection, you would get a different look into the archive itself. IKU, Shuli Chang, 2000. This is not love. This is sex. IKU is a porn film that takes up where Blade Runner left off. I'm assuming many people here have watched Blade Runner. The internet porn enterprise Genome Corporation has taken over and dispatched IKU coders to collect orgasm data, developing the ability to sell profitable and addictive on-demand orgasms. Time Traveler, Skawanati, 2008. This is a website from the future. Watch for upcoming episodes in which Hunter Deerhouse sails to Europe with Pocahontas in AD 1615, aids and abets the Dakota Sioux Uprising of 1862, and finds true love in the Kanawake Mohawk Territory in 2009. So Skawanati is actually in New York right now. She lives in Montreal, but she has an event at the New Museum tomorrow where she'll be talking about many of the first Indigenous net art pieces, including this Machinima Time Traveler, as well as Cyber Powwow and Abtech. So go to Rhizome's site if you want to go to that event tomorrow. Anarcha Lucy Betsy, Klaukinki, 2013. Sick of the body colonialism. I don't want to call the glands that makes me ejaculate rivers of pleasure with the guy's name that says he discovered some part of my body. Anarcha was a black slave that suffered in her own flesh the experimentation of the sadist idol of skiing. She and only she can name my flesh. So here, Klaukinki is giving a bit of gynecological history. So here she tells about Dr. Skeen, who experimented on enslaved, unconsenting women, Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. And then, even now to this day, the gland that becomes engorged during orgasm is called the Skeen's gland. So she here is adamantly proposing that it be called Anarcha's gland. The Bitch Mutant Manifesto, VNS Matrix, 1996. Your fingers probe my neural network. The tingling sensation in the tips of your fingers are my synapses responding to your touch. It's not chemistry, it's electric. Don't ever stop fingering my separating holes, extending my oozing boundary. But in spiral space, there is no they, there is only us. Suck my code. Data Domination, Mistress Harley, 2016. So much of our sex life happens online. We stream porn, swipe on Tinder, and send pics of our bits on Snapchat and Skype our fantasies to lovers across oceans. Our psyches are becoming so enmeshed with our computers that it's becoming difficult to tell where we end and the cyber world begins. Mistress Harley is a tech dom. Instead of dominating bodies, she dominates online life. So data domination is a subset of tech dom, which is a subset of BDSM. And you might have experienced remote access if you need tech support. So if your Adobe Creative Suite crashes, then you can call Adobe and they'll have someone get remote access to your computer and they can then control your mouse and try to fix your software. This also happens in Zoom classes. I've done this a lot for my students. But in data domination, it's not about nudity or camming. It's purely about a relinquishing of power from the sub to the dom. So in this case, the sub would grant their dom remote access, who can then control their social media accounts, their bank accounts, all of their software, and all while the sub watches. Daddy Residency, Nahi Kim, 2019. I plan to have a baby after 7 years by artificial insemination, and I'd like to have a variety of companions for that rigorous but invaluable parenting experience. So I'm launching this open call for daddy applicants who want to raise the baby with me for a certain amount of time. The application deadline is July 31st, 2025. So that means all of you still have time to apply. And last but not least, I wanted to end with the Old Boys Network from 1997. The Old Boys Network is regarded as the first international cyberfeminist alliance. Normally, the term Old Boys Network is used as a metaphor to describe an informal interrelation of men. Nowadays, the Old Boys Network may be used for a dangerous cyberfeminist virus. So before I switch to Laura, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Tommy Martinez for building the AR app that kind of animates all these static images. And again, as mentioned, since we are at the Center for Book Arts, instead of delving a lot into the content of the book, we really wanted to show how the book was created, as well as some of our material references. So let me quickly switch these out.
All right, hi everyone. I'm gonna just offer a few notes about how Mindy and I approached the design and some decisions that we made in the process. Can I ask if everyone can hear me on Zoom? Okay. So the first thing about the book is that it's actually a set of templates. So as Mindy kind of showed you, there's like in the upper left, there's like a big text template, there's like this big pull quote, there's the index itself on the upper right, and then there's these sub-indexes, so sub-indexes of people, titles, images, and image captions. And so the book was designed as a set of these templates, and all of the information that was fed into the template was in Google Drive and Google Documents. And so part of the design of the book was really designing a system that would take this information and flow it into the templates of the book design. And the way we did that is we worked with Lily Healy, who is she's a designer and software engineer, and she works for The New Yorker, and she actually has scripted The New Yorker to be fairly automated, which is amazing in itself. But we worked with her on this book too, and this is kind of like a screen recording of she's taking the information from Google Docs, it's flowing through her scripts and XML markup, and then it's literally instantly generating this book and these templates. So the templates that I created are essentially a set of styles. And so I can, once everything is in the book, then I can tweak the styles. So it's pretty, it was a pretty interesting process because we had to find a way to toggle between this information in docs that's constantly changing to the information in the book and the design of the book. So this is a view of one of those docs of the main index. And essentially, while Mindy and editors were building the index and editing the index, they were also coding it with like in very simple ways, like a title is highlighted in red, a subtitle in green, an editor's note in blue. And so those are the things that the scripts are reading to then turn it into the design as I have the design in InDesign. So this is just a screen recording of the script taking that Google Doc with the highlights and transforming it in a split second into the index design, which is pretty cool. There's also something to keep in mind about the book if you have the book and you look through it, and this is an idea that Mindy and I talked a lot about, which is native resolution. So all of the images in the book are maxed out to the width that they can take, whether it's a tiny thumbnail in an image index or this larger page view. But these artifacts natively were sometimes tiny, sometimes only 50 pixels wide, sometimes larger. And we sort of had a guiding principle that we wouldn't change that native resolution. We would always sort of embrace it. So you can see in this view, you have two things that look very different. One looks crunchy in some way and the other one looks blurry. And so in this book, you're going to encounter all of these different resolutions, which will give you a clue to maybe their original size and maybe original time too. This is just another way to show that some of them look very clear, some are blurry, some crunchy, but it's sort of fascinating to me to blow them up super, super big and to see their materiality. There's another thing that is happening in the book, which is this neon green, and that comes from the Cyberfeminism Index.com. And we were then tasked to how to bring that into the print version. So the print version is printed with green fluorescent ink to try to achieve the idea of the screen. And this is like an unfolding of the book cover and in the last page and the front page. It's sort of like this book is enveloped in this neon screen green. And then it might be hard to see this, but you can kind of see the parts of the images that are green. We also extracted the green where it occurred in the images and we replaced it with the fluorescent ink. So those parts will kind of glow in the dark a little bit and kind of be brighter than they normally would. And some of the images, it's like very, a lot of the images had this as part of their fundamental materiality. So it was quite nice to add this as an additional aspect of the book. But then because of the economy of the book, we have certain pages that can be color and certain pages that are, some pages are 5 colors, some pages are 2 colors. And so this is a situation where this image is actually, there's 2 green computers on both sides, but because of the economy of printing, we could only print so many pages in 5 colors, and so many pages then were just 2 colors. So this is like a little, I don't know, Easter egg of like an image that's like not quite right, but it's like kind of in 2 color worlds at once. Another aspect of the book that we talked a lot about was the idea of system fonts, especially Arial. Mindy and I really like Arial. It was, it's 1982, and Patricia Saunders worked on it in parallel with Robin Nicholas. So cyberfeminismindex.com is done with Arial system font. This book is done with Arial Narrow as a pretty practical consideration of needing to fit a lot of information in a small space, and so needing like the narrow width to get to have the type be as big as possible on the pages. There's also this other aspect I kind of like to think of as like soft and vulnerable. So the book is printed on like a soft newsprint. And so when you're flipping through it, it's really soft to the touch. But the newsprint also, it has another aspect too, which is that it's really vulnerable over time. So over time, as soon as you take the plastic off the book, maybe a couple of years from now, it might be yellow, it might be different, it might be less soft than it is now. And so I think it has this relationship to some of these things that we're talking about in the book, which some of these websites are actually quite fragile and actually quite, easy to lose over time. And I think the book has that quality also. So now the rest of this, I'm gonna talk a little bit about physical specimens, and then Mindy's gonna talk about reference specimens, and then that's it. So
We should plug that camera back in.
yeah. Wow, okay, cool. All right, so what you're seeing here, and we're going to encourage you all to just come up and look at all of this stuff afterwards, but what you're seeing here under my hand is the press sheet from the book. And one thing about the book is this, the size of the book is the maximum, it's kind of the maximum medium size. So this is in a mass-produced book, this is the maximum size you can have as like a medium book. And so our thought was like, we want to generate the least waste as possible. And that's why this book is this big. And you can kind of see it maxing out the space on this press sheet because you have 4 covers fitting as tight as they can possibly fit on this press sheet. So we talked a little bit about newsprint being soft and fluffy, but also it has this like bulk. So this was a dummy that we made. This is the second dummy that we made that's quite big, and this was the printer that we were using. This is the maximum spine width they could do, and so that was sort of our target for the thickness of the book. We wanted to max it out in both ways. We also did a test of the same book, the same number of pages with glossy paper, and you can see the difference.
They're both 648 pages or something.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, just so you know. Then we also have this, which you're welcome to look at. This is when they print. Oh, cool. When they print the book and they give it to you first, they give you what's called folded and gathered. So this is the unbound book, and it's hand cut. So you can kind of like, some of the margins in here are kind of like tight and messed up because it was cut by hand, but this was, you know, what we proofed the book before we approved it and sent it to final production.
And these are all loose signatures. So it allowed us to get a sense of the margins and the creases, etc.
And then there's one precedent that I want to mention, and that's this Japanese paperback porn that a friend gave me from Japan. And this is also kind of the idea of like a maximum. I think this is probably a maximum bind on a spine as well, and it has this newsprint, has this like lofty, like soft feeling. So I've had this book on my bookshelf for years, and it's something I've often thought about. And I think, yeah, it probably subliminally was something I was thinking about in designing this book.
So there are a lot of versions of trying to get this performance ready, but we were also struck with the COVID curse of the supply chain, and this paper was just not ready. So when I was doing a McDowell residency, I really wanted a copy of the full book so I can plan this presentation in the sequence. So you can see all my things here, but this is actually a print-on-demand version. So Laura created files that I could send to this print-on-demand service called Mixem, and you can see the difference in the color. It's not this bright neon green, it's more of a forest green. All of the pages are this bright white, kind of like what you just find in like an office supply store. And it also has a very tight bind. So if you hold it on the spine, it's very stiff, let's say, for the at-home viewer. And that's in contrast to our current book, which looks big, but is really fluffy. So this was kind of our goal, like a book you can hold with one hand. It feels really feathery, but it's ultimately the same exact text or manuscript. So we also want to talk about some design influences. Does anyone know what this is? Thank you, Shira.
Thank you, Shira.
It's upside down. So this is the Talmud. I like showing this as an example because there's actually a video of Ted Nelson on his YouTube channel called The Ted Nelson, where he talks about his proto-internet Xanadu. And he's also considered the father of the concept of hypertext and hyperlinks. And he holds up a page from the Talmud, which you can see is structured like this. Very, very beautiful nested column structures. he explains, and I'm sorry if this is incorrect, I don't read this language, nor do I follow this religion, but the center column is called the Mishnah, which is the primary religious doctrine. The columns surrounding this are commentaries on the Mishnah, and the outermost column are commentaries on the commentary. So built into the architecture of the page, it's basically reinforcing this idea of co-authorship or collectivity. And this is in contrast to this idea of a singular author who might bury some things in the footnotes. So this was actually a big influence when I was designing the first catalog. Very different. This was in 2019. I made this in 2 months. And during it, Jeff Hahn, who is not here, but also a designer friend, gave me a lot of feedback, but also in this initial version, which was also scripted, we have an indexical spine. So these are actually all of our cross-references that are buried in all of these entries. And for me, it was a nice shift to not only move the footnotes and cross-references from the bottom to the side, but also to center it and kind of claim that these references are some of the most important parts of the page. This was also printed using a print-on-demand service called the Espresso Book Machine. I think McNally Jackson has one. But you can also see my tabbing here, because again, for me, it was also part of thinking about the book as a performance object. So thinking about the right sequence and flow for how to do this kind of performative reading. Yeah. We have a lot of big books with us, and it was really hard to get them here. So another big design influence for us was the McMaster car. So this is kind of like the Bible of hardware, if we're going to keep using religious metaphors. But it basically shows all of the different hardware pieces that you can buy from this company called McMaster Car. I would actually love to know how they automate this, because I can't imagine that they lay this out every time they have a new entry. But you can also see that they're using a sort of Bible paper, so it's much thinner, but theirs is also maybe like the dream of what kind of spine we would want. Like it just feels so floppy. But maybe if we do a reprint, we'll figure out how to make this happen.
It's the second edition.
Yeah. So structurally, we are also very inspired by 6 years. So Jeff Hahn recommended this as well. It's about the dematerialization of art by the art critic Lucy Lepard. And in it, in her author's note, I guess you can't really read the text here anyway, but she describes a sequence. So she describes how all of the titles are in bold, all of the metadata is italicized, and all the entries are Roman. And the entries themselves are also excerpts of existing texts, reviews, essays about contemporary art. And it basically flows similar to the way ours does, in chronological order. So as a design object, I mean, I'm sure we can talk about that too, but textually, it was kind of the perfect idea for an automated structure, especially because we were pulling so many entries from so many different people. She actually has images in line, which are quite nice, and they kind of break up the grid, but ultimately, if you read it through, it doesn't make sense as a linear text. It's kind of something that requires a nonlinear reading structure. Okay, just a few more. There's kind of been a precedence for what an internet book looks like. So this, I don't know when this is published, 2019? 2019 by Rhizome. Rhizome has been a huge supporter of the Cyberfeminism Index. I don't know if they would say this, but I kind of consider it like a sister publication, but maybe it's more of a child or like a stepchild. But they actually also use newsprint. This was designed by our friends Jiminy Ha and Emmanuel Yang. They're using a system font also, Times New Roman. We intentionally chose Arial because it's one of the only system fonts co-designed by a woman. They use some internet conventions like a blue link. Their text is trying to mimic this idea of scrolling, so it always gets cut off. And to also call out Laura's note about the resolution, Dragon is their preservation director, and he actually opens up these old websites on an external, super high resolution monitor to get a crisp screenshot, which is why their images maybe look better than the one that's online.
All of the screenshots are 4 times more than native resolution.
Which is wild, especially since many of these were created in the 90s. But for us, I personally like the kind of crunchiness, so we really wanted to embrace that pixelation as a way to indicate its time. And one of the earliest influences before this project even existed was the Whole Earth catalog. So this is the Millennium one, and I like using this as an example because, let's see if I can find one. I thought I tagged one. Yeah, so the Whole Earth catalog is this 1970s, 1980s countercultural publication created by Stuart Brand and a range of collaborators. And it's actually considered a proto-internet because it was almost like a search engine for that time, especially for people of that community. It's also lauded by every single tech CEO you'll find in Silicon Valley. So Steve Jobs called it Google before Google. There's a lot of reasons why that's not true. Google is highly automated and this is highly curated, but ultimately it kind of serves this purpose of being a source book for a community and creating a document of a time. And throughout it, they have cross-references. So this is a little cat in hole icon. We're on page 271, and if you want to learn about media literacy, you can jump to page 220. So they're also using this kind of analog hyperlinking structure. Oh, and then when you get there, the cat is in the hole. So this was also completely designed with cut-ups and paste-ups. Oh wait, this one wasn't. I don't have this one was, but the early issues of Whole Earth Catalog were created using cut-ups. So compare this type of tight column structure to this. So this is the New Women's Survival Catalog. Came out the same decade as the Whole Earth Catalog. It was a New York Times bestseller. It was billed as the feminist Whole Earth Catalog, and it doesn't receive nearly as much recognition as the Whole Earth Catalog. And you might attribute that to the quantity. There's like 30, 40 of these and like a whole umbrella of catalogs, whereas these are only 2. But it still serves as a really nice document of second wave feminism. And they actually started off at Columbia. Their advisor, Susan Rennie and Kirsten Grimstad, their advisor told them that revolution cannot happen in an institution. You have to go grassroots. So they got in a car and drove from New York to LA and talked to a lot of people along the way. So you see people collecting feminist bookstores, resources against sexual assault, resources for divorce, liberating young children from sex roles, like a lot of similar things that we're talking about today, 50 years later. And I just want to talk about a few objects also. So, you might have, let's see if I can find it quickly. This is the crunchy one. Oh. So in the book, there is a logo that we became obsessed with. Let's see if I can find it quickly. Sorry, yeah, it kind of goes out of focus. So this was a tiny icon sitting at the bottom of a site called Dark Core by a net artist named Gash Girl in 1993. Gash Girls also goes by Francesca De Rimini. She's part of VNS Matrix. And there was no context for this. It's actually a really beautiful mark and also designed and rendered quite well, considering it was made in the early 90s. But it's two female icons in silver, or in gold, interspersed with two male icons. So when thinking about this, I was telling Laura about how I couldn't figure out more about this mark and it was frustrating and etc. So Christmas Day, I got this note from Laura, which I won't let you read that, but it also came with this printed link, which was impossible to type in because of capital I's and lowercase l's and etc. But it was actually the object file of this 3D printed version of that dark core symbol. I told her I wanted to make it into a bracelet, which is why she had made it at this size. You'll see that one is missing. I was doing a residency and I wanted to make the ankh into a cast, and I don't know where it is anymore. So now it's a broken object. But maybe at one point we'll make this into some sort of bracelet object. I also want to point out my ring. So I actually was trying to figure out a way to have an active QR code rather than constantly pulling out a link or a business card or something. So I ordered a signet ring, and instead of giving them my initials, I sent them this QR code, which has to be at least 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters to scan. That's the smallest it can be. And this actually does scan. It goes to cyberfeminismindex.com. And I predict that this will be the next business card. I'm gonna drink your water. Okay. 2 final things. This is a postcard by Dexter Sinister, who's also having a book launch today and tomorrow if you want to swing by their storefront in Lower East Side. But in it, they have a USB, and on the back it says Dexter Sinister Universal Serial Bus, which stands for USB. And on it you'll find a lot of goodies, but I'll let you find one at Printed Matter to learn what they are. But when working with Tommy Martinez on this bespoke AR app, we were sending huge folders of files back and forth. And it would work perfectly on his computer, and somehow sending it through WeTransfer or Dropbox, the compression would corrupt the file, even if we asked for no compression. And it was really odd. And we realized the only way to get the app to work on my computer was to transfer it through a sneaker net. So a sneaker net is typically something that they do in countries where the Wi-Fi is under surveillance or their internet is unstable. It basically means delivering a hard drive with your sneakers to another person. So we actually used hard drives too, but this is now a Cyberfeminism Index USB. You can't really read it, but it's etched. Apparently this is a popular thing on Etsy. This is a wedding Etsy prop, but they want to get their wedding photos on a beautiful object. So now we have this crystal Cyberfeminism Index USB. Okay, last but not least. So this essay has been really important for my practice and for this book overall. It's a tiny chapbook. It was just reprinted by Ignota Press, and it has a foreword by Donna Haraway, who wrote the Cyborg Manifesto, amongst many other things. And the carrier bag theory by Ursula Guin was published in 1986 and posits that the first tool is actually not the spear, which is a tool of dominance, but also actually the basket, which is a tool of gathering. So not only does it reframe our history of technology, and also expand it to include a lot of analog technologies, not the digital connotation that we all have, it also reframes our history of the protagonist. So this changes from moving from the spear to the basket, it changes from the individual hero to a collective or a community, from a he to a we. So this, if anything, feels like it was highly inspirational for this, which is not only crowdsourced, so a collection of material gatherings, but also the container itself, which maybe the book as a basket, the website as a basket, and then being able to talk about it with all of you, a social gathering in a way. Anyone else? Okay, so that's all we have. You're welcome to come to the front to look at some of these books. Thank you so much. Or maybe I'll keep this open. Or actually, Camilo, I don't know if we want to do a Q&A or anything. Oh, yeah. Or not, yeah. Yeah. So the gathering process has been ongoing since 2019. It was first a spreadsheet, then a website, then this book, and will still be the website. It will collect entries in perpetuity. The design, less than a year. The production, 6 months. I mean, the books aren't even here. They're on a cargo ship somewhere stuck at customs. So we have a small number of advanced copies for sale, but yeah, maybe like a year and a half for the book itself. Maybe longer, because even if the design was a year and the production was 6 months, the editing process took like 6 months to a year because we used 2 different editors. It's like editing an encyclopedia. It was a whole thing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think primary source is a huge deal to both of us, meaning that many of these entries, the only way they can be sourced if someone's writing about them in critical text or academic context is citing the website. But now someone can cite a book, and you explained it better, like how book sources are regarded in academia.
They weight printed citations more highly than new media citations, so websites or artworks or etc. So this was kind of a hack to get 703 secondary sources on entries that might not have any. And just to clarify between a secondary and a primary source, if you go on Wikipedia, you can't make a page for someone if they only have primary sources. This means I write about myself. It's only considered legitimate if you have secondary sources, which means I write about Laura and link that, because it's supposed to be the subjective third party. So in some ways, this was also a way to insert a lot of that. So the citational hack was part of it. I think also having made so many websites and dealt with like interactive tech, I see how quickly those websites degrade. So in many ways, this felt like a form of posterity. Even if it's a document and it's kind of contained, and the website will try to keep online for as long as possible, a lot of the websites in this book aren't online anymore. We have to find them through the Wayback Machine, or internet, or Rhizome's Conifer, formerly web recorded. So
that's what's interesting to compare to the Rhizome book, because it shows how there's different ways to preserve this material, but each way of preserving, I think, is equally valid and sort of an approach.
yeah. Yeah. So the website was commissioned by Rhizome, and part of that was to have it archived in their art base, which is basically their, I think it's called a future institution. It's their mission to have these things online for as long as the internet is around. So libraries and archives are also considered memory institutions. Yes. That said, Angeline and I made a lot of decisions for how to keep this website online. So we're using a lot of system defaults, stretched form fields, system fonts. We're not using any third-party libraries. We're trying to make sure that the decisions that we made sure the website lasted as long as possible. And websites like this was made in '97, but still works perfectly now. So we kind of tried to shape the design around some of these sites because we found that by leaning on defaults and keeping the sites hard-coded, it was actually fairly durable, whether they intended that or not. So there may be two avenues, an archival avenue and a design avenue. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good idea. Right now, no. I think in our dream, when we were first talking with Lily, we were trying to get a way to have any edit done on the website flow into the spreadsheet, which would flow into InDesign automatically, or else Laura has to constantly re-import these things. But it was just really complicated. I think it's possible, but it was a matter of bandwidth. That said, I think if we ever release like an ebook version, I would really like all of the internal cross-references to link to other parts or pages of the book. But right now, we don't have an idea to link it to the website, so that's actually a good idea. So yeah, you planted a seed. Yeah.
I mean, the other aspect of doing the book in less than a year, it sounds like a lot of time, but actually it's not that much time, and I think a lot of our high hopes were exactly what you were saying, where we were like, oh, like, it should link to the website, oh, like, it should be, like, constantly auto-updating. We had another crazy idea for, like, more hyperlinks in the book, and, like, more layouts that looked more like the Talmud. But in the end, we kind of had to, like, be economical and kind of, like, streamline some things about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's why I'm so excited about this book tour, because it might be the first time that I see a lot of these people in person for the first time, because we've communicated so much online or via email. What we've been trying to do is, in many of these locations, focus on the people in that area. So the New York one a few weeks ago, we only invited artists based in the New York area. And we're doing one in Berlin where we're only inviting artists based in Berlin or London or etc. So this is kind of a nice way to not only talk about this physical proximity, but also how much it shifts between region to region, and especially across time. That said, I do think like the social gathering aspect has been really meaningful, because when we launched the Cyberfeminismindex.com, I was upstate at the time and I launched it on my porch, and like that was it, which maybe is fair for a digital medium. But because now we have a physical medium, it's really nice having physical social gatherings. So thank you all again for coming. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is an example. Sorry, the camera is so bad, but if it was ever in a different language, we would put that first. So right now you see Korean, and then it's followed by our translation. And this, you'll see this throughout in like Russian and Spanish and etc. It was also helpful to kind of have like a steward in each region too. So in Korea, I was working a lot with So-young Choi, who was kind of an expert of cyberfeminism in South Korea or East Asia. In Latin America, I worked with the Cyber Girls, who is a current active, they call themselves hack feministas, currently based in Mexico City. But I think that was actually a big learning curve too. Cyberfeminism is an imperfect umbrella term, right? It kind of gives you a sense of like what it includes, but the name changes so much across time and region. So in Korea, it's called net femis. In Latin America, it's hack feministas. Even in the English-speaking world, there's strands like xenofeminism, glitch feminism, Afrofuturist, womanism, etc. So all of those are kind of brought together here, and I explained that more in my intro. So we like to see this as a very blurry boundary or like permeable container, because no matter what the name is, many of the themes are quite consistent. A criticism of technology through its dissemination of feminism, right? It's also this feedback loop. So that was a great learning curve too, because initially I was like, I can't find, where is Arab cyberfeminism? Like it just doesn't come up on JSTOR or anything. But then once you find the expert in that area and the different syntactical changes, then actually felt quite generative. Yeah.
I think another thing to note is that even when, like wherever syntax is important, even if it's in English or something, that syntax is preserved.
Oh yeah, you can find.
That's another reason why most of the columns of text are justified, so that when there's something syntactically important that's more ragged or looks like concrete words, it's more obvious that that's the original intent.
I can't find one right now, but a lot of these things came from net art pieces where the composition of the text was really important. This is a slight example. There's like these hard breaks in between these lines, but there's also some where we try to preserve like the indentation. I don't know if I'll be able to find that right now. But yeah, there are some where the concrete poetry or the concrete form was as meaningful to the text as the words themselves, so we wanted to capture that. So in the Google Doc, I just left Laura a bunch of tags for don't delete the styling. And she had to hand typeset all of it.